Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Software Development Architecture Podcast. This is podcast number 2 in the digital analytics series. In the last one, we took a look at, we just, took a high level look at digital analytics as an area of work. We spent a minute or two, if you will. We looked at an article by FullStory on a list of, potential, tools available. We took one of the tools, their own tool, FullStory, and set it up, went through the process, did the basic wiring that needed to be done to actually analyze Snowpal's web application, just as an example. We did a number of other things, but that's kind of the gist of what we did. We're going to pick up from where we left off. And in this podcast, we're going to see what it means for a digital analyst. And again, I'm not one. We don't have a dedicated digital analyst in the team. As a startup, folks in the team wear multiple hats. So some of it we do, but perhaps in a non-traditional manner, if you will. So if you are a professional digital analyst, let us know. We'll be happy to have a conversation with you to understand how you might be doing things, what your experience is. But this is our take, just by looking at it for like a half hour or 1 hour in the last podcast. And then we're just going to continue. There's going to be another half-hour session, give or take. So the idea is at the end of this 1 hour 2 podcast, you should have some idea about the space of digital analysis, and then understand what some of the tools are and how you can actually use a tool, and what do you do after you leverage a tool and analyze a platform or a system or an application, and how do you take it forward. That the second part of it is what we're going to look at in this particular podcast. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so we took a look at, let's make sure you can actually see this. Yes, you can. We took a look at FullStory. Again, go back and look. I highly recommend you check out, watch the first podcast before you watch this one. Otherwise, you're not going to have context, right? Once you've watched it, you're going to have you're going to understand what we're talking about here. Long story short, so in the last one, he pointed this to a lower environment where one of our lower environments where actually nobody else is actively using it. I just want to be the only one using it during the podcast and until we complete this. So the only activity you see are the ones we actually did during the podcast. There were a couple of users. We signed up as a couple of users and did a bunch of things. Now, let's see, I think I did a couple of actions today. Let's see if it actually shows up here. Yep, it does. This is what I did today. So let's see how it breaks it down, because that was a couple of days back. So this, oh, it says 2 sessions. Where is the previous session? So if I go play here. Yep, this is from the other day. This is the first session. So I'm just trying to understand the user interface here. How do I get from this session to... Yeah, I guess I didn't think I saw it. Now it shows it here. So I guess there was a bit of a lag there. This is today's session. All that I did was just logged in and I think I went to the dashboard, right? That's basically it for today in terms of what I actually did. So I'm not going to go to what we actually already discussed in the previous podcast. We're going to continue. So in this one, we're going to say, okay, now that you signed up for a tool, you spent some time, we've analyzed it, we've got some idea about, what events are, what frustrated actions are, or rage clicks are, a number of those digital analysis or analyst related terminologies. We explored that a tiny bit in the last podcast. Let's say you've done this. How do you take this forward? What do you do? I reckon this is what you probably might do. If not, if you are a professional analyst and you do it differently, definitely do let us know. We'll be happy to learn. But this is what I'm speculating. After you do the analysis, you're going to have to communicate that analysis to your, product team, the product management team. How do you end up doing that, right? To your product managers. Here is one way you can do it, right? I don't know if that's how it's typically done, but there's one way I can see how you can do it, and it'll help. I wrote this up. Let's look at it in a in a diagrammatic fashion, if you will. So what can the process potentially be? There can be 4 steps, excuse me, to the process. The first is a general product usage analysis, right? So when you're looking at this tool and you're trying to find out what it does, and you're trying to find out, more details about user behavior and user experience, you can look at it from, the way at least I see it at the highest level. You can look at it in one of 4 different ways that I've listed here. One is, you can say you want to do a general product usage analysis. That's one approach. The second is, you can take a client-specific product usage analysis. We'll talk about each of them in some detail, but I'm going to read it out. Third is feature-specific product analysis. And the fourth one is, I just call it ad hoc. What do each of them mean? Again, these are terminologies I've literally created for sort of sharing my 2 cents. So if you Google them till our content gets indexed, you're going to probably not going to find this, right? Then you're likely going to find something else that perhaps maps to this idea and the monologue and the conversation we're having here, but not maybe directly so. And if it does, it's going to be purely coincidental. I can tell you that much. Okay, so general product usage analysis. What does it mean? Here, what I mean by that is, you don't have a client in mind, you don't have a feature in mind, you don't have a page in mind. You're just saying, as a product, as an application, lots of customers are using it. Maybe it's internal, maybe it's external. I want to get a sense of how it's actually being used, right? At the highest level. That's this category, the general product usage analysis. Now, if I expanded that, what are some items I've broken this down into? Where is user spending most of their time, right? Now, if you look at a product, again, let's say I'm going to go to one of our lower environments. Right, this is a lower environment, right? But it's reasonably current with production, so it's okay to use this for now. And yeah, our production URL is snowpal.com, so definitely do check out our product and use it to manage projects of all kinds. Anyway, so back to this. When you're doing back to where is user spending most of the time? Let's say in our product, when we start to analyze, we want to know, is the user spending a fair bit of time on the dashboard to understand what's going on? Again, here is test data. So this page looks empty, but in an environment where it's not test, you're going to see a lot more information, right? So if I go, I have production data, but I don't know if I can actually share that. So I'm going to let it be. So the user could share some fair amount of time here. Or they could go into a particular key. A key is a project in our case. So they could go into the key and then they can look at charts, for instance. Maybe they're spending time on charts. I mean, again, there is no data here. Okay, let's create some data. A block. I'm going to say other. And now if you go to the charts, it's going to show you the blocks. Right, so this is one chart. And again, we have plenty of charts. You can go look at, spend more time here, right? So if the user were spending time here on these charts, this is going to tell us, hey, you know what? You have a lot of features, and we have plenty of features. And if I go through one of our older documentation, just to give you context here. Go to the product features page. I think we broke it down, many different ways actually. Yeah, it goes page after page, and this is not the most recent one. There's lot more features we've added. But let's say you're looking at this, right? So there's a lot of features. Now, perhaps the user is using, it's like the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of your users are most likely going to be using 20% of your features. It's true for most systems, essentially. Now, we want to get a sense of what that 20% is. It may not be what you thought. It may not be what your product team thought. It may not be what your engineering team thought. It could be something entirely different. How do you find out what that is? And you use a tool such as, say, FullStory, for instance, right? And I think there's plenty others like Hotjar. Was that the other one we looked at the other day? Hotjar. Yep. So there's a lot of tools. You can look them up, but essentially that's what it's going to tell you, right? Where is user spending most of their time? That's something of interest to you, definitely, right? We'll see how you take this forward to the team. But before we do that, maybe we'll run through the rest of this list. Identifying rage clicks. And rage clicks and frustrations are terminologies used by not just this product, this tool that we had seen. I feel like it's generic terminology, probably used in the space of digital analysis. So rage clicks and frustrations are pages that your users sitting on, actions they're trying to perform that they were not able to successfully complete. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to show them on Snowplow because our actions do complete. But let's say you're using some other product and not using us, and they are buggy. Then you're going to be making some changes here. You're going to say some new description, and then you're going to hit save, and then it doesn't happen, right? It doesn't save or something like that. So the user hits save 3 times. That's going to be a frustration or rage click, and you can find out what the finer nuances, the differences between those terminologies are. But that's in essentially, I can put that into a bucket for the purposes of this conversation. I say monologue and conversation interchangeably because it is a monologue. I'm not talking to anybody else. But even though I'm looking at the camera, I know I'm talking to somebody, and I almost imagine that somebody's actually sitting here. So it's kind of a conversation in that sense, if you will. So anyway, when I say that, just take it, I use it interchangeably. Um, Least used functionality. Now, there could be something in our, we probably spend a lot of time. We have a conversations feature. I'm not saying it's least used, but it's almost like LinkedIn, right? You have conversations, but you kick off your conversations on LinkedIn, but you don't prolong, once you get connected with somebody, maybe you reach out to them and you have other ways to communicate with that person. So LinkedIn messaging got you started, but you're not using it just as much after that, right? As an example. Our conversations are along those lines. You use them during the context of a project, but you want more robust conversations, then you probably definitely going to go to a tool that's meant for it, like Slack, for instance, right? You want to use the best tool for the job. At the same time, we took the pain to adding the conversations feature because to have these initial conversations, you don't need like a Slack workspace or, you don't need to do all of that setup, which is cumbersome, right? And if you're doing a college or a school project with somebody and, it's a transient project where you're working with that member for like a couple of weeks, it is actually laborious to set up a Slack workspace, to be honest, and do all the provisionings. It's much easier to just use our conversations. But again, the reason I say is so you're using it, but you may not be using it as much as using rest of the features, right? Not perhaps as much as using Kanban, for instance, right? That is the type of thing you actually want to find out by least use functionality. Now, why is it important? It's important because you might actually, your product team could have come up with a functionality that's pretty cool, and the engineering team implemented it. They did a great job. Everybody's happy, and it took like say 6 weeks to implement it. What if your users are spending like 2% of the time there, and maybe a good fair number of users are not even using that functionality? Then what happens? Let me make sure I'm actually recording this. I am, yep. Then what happens is it's not the best use of your time and money, right? Again, using, building functionality becomes a lot easier if you did not have to do what you don't need to do. What I mean by that is you should be building the unique aspects of what you're doing, not reinventing the wheel, which is exactly why a slight digression, we have plenty of APIs published, not just on AWS and in other marketplaces as well. So you can build your systems in entirety by just focusing on areas that you have. Let's say you're building a web app or a mobile app as a simple example, right? You focus on the user experience, the UI, and all of that. For all of the backend, at least for most of it, if not all of it, you can leverage our SaaS products so you don't spend a lot of time reinventing the wheel. And you can check out our APIs and they do plenty of stuff. Now, even with that said, even when you do that, you're going to spend some amount of time building your interfaces. And what if your users are not using them at all? Then which means you want to build something else, some other feature, make some other enhancements to get the best bang for your buck. That's what you want to use, say a tool, a digital analyst tool, analysis tool to actually tell you which are the pieces of functionality that are not used all that much. Should our teams be spending as much time? And maybe some of it, where users are not spending a lot of time. It was a complex piece of functionality that you implemented. So it took time and money, but it's also kind of buggy, right? Which means even if it's buggy, you probably don't want to fix those bugs because they are low priority bugs. Even though they could be say 1 bugs, severity 1, your priority could be like P3 or P4 because not everybody is using it. Now, do we react to any issues we have that way in our products? Absolutely not. We cannot do it, but it's understandable, right? As you have there are some compromises you're going to have to make. We make some compromises as well. We have to build 10 enhancements. We have time and money for like 4. We build 4, right? We don't try to do 10 of them in a sloppy manner. We try to nail the 4 that we build. So all of that depends on your team, but the idea is you want to use the tool to figure out what functionality is not used all that much, right? So you can look at a lot of their charts and trends and all that kind of stuff to figure that out. And then the last item I have here is the navigation experience. How are people navigating? Like if I go to one of those, let's say we pick, I don't know, let's pick 2 sessions. Let's go to one that has a lot more activity from 2 days ago. A lot of, this has a complete recording of what happened, right? So it tells you the path. How did the user use the product? You're actually reliving their experience. So they went from page A to page B, they click this button, or if you notice that they're having to click 3 buttons or 3 icons and it takes them 2 seconds or a second to find where it is located, there's a user experience problem. And if they have to click 3 buttons to get, they have to do 3 clicks to get to where they need to go repeatedly, that's another user experience problem. Those are the types of things you are going to find out. You intend to find out to improve your user experience, right? So the navigation, what did they click? How often did they click that? How much time did it take for them to click that? All of this matters. All of this matters. Now you want to also ask your users, but in addition, not in lieu of that, on top of that, you have to make judgments yourselves because maybe your users think they have certain pain points. But sure, they do have them as pain points, but maybe they have other pain points they've gotten used to. Because I've seen more often than not, even when you have a sloppy experience, if people find value in what you're providing, they will actually use it and they'll get used to the behavior. It's like a pothole on a street that you need to use to get to work. I mean, you cannot not get to work, and maybe there's no alternative routes, and maybe the alternative routes, even if there are, take a whole lot longer. So people are going to be using the same street. And if there's a pothole, they're going to, drive around it. That does not mean there isn't a problem. It's just that the user got used to the problem. And the moment they find another street, they're going to dump this and go to the next one, which now in this example is dump your solution and product and go to the next one, which you certainly don't want for to happen, especially if the user's onboarded. You want to go to any extreme and any length possible to making sure you keep your users satisfied, right? It's much harder to, it's not easy to retain users, I understand. Much like retaining employees, which I did a podcast on a couple of days back. Definitely check that out. How you can improve employee retention. But retaining users is important and difficult, not easy, but actually acquiring new users, I have to believe, and I know by virtue of what we're doing and we have in all our products, it's a whole lot more difficult, right? So definitely don't lose anybody who's on board with your platform. Find out what their experience is and how you can make those improvements. Now let's keep going. Now let's say we go to where user is spending most of the time. I think we may have spoken to this already. Is it because of, are they spending most of the time on a particular feature because it's providing that much value, right? You know what, maybe they're spending more time here creating blocks, right? Or creating pods or creating tasks, for instance. Or let's say I go into a block and I'm adding a checklist, right? I'm going to say, let's see, I'm going to add a checklist item, record digital analytics, podcast. Okay, right, that's and then I can actually add another checklist here for what it's worth. I was going to show you. Okay, you can do basic stuff with a typical checklist. You're deleting and making those changes and things of that nature, and you can rename it. Let's say I just did a couple of random things here just to tell you that the user could be spending a lot of time on checklists. Now that could tell you, hey, that's actually one of the features they actually like. That's one possibility. Or is there a possibility that they're actually doing this because somehow these buttons were not placed correctly or whatnot? So it took them a lot longer to actually get something done. Let's say if I want to reorder a checklist, I can go here, I can drop it, and it's reordered, right? Now, what if I had to do 3 things to reorder this, so it took me that much more time? Instead of doing it in like half a second or 200 milliseconds, it took like 2 seconds. That may not be because they like that functionality as much. It may be because it was poorly implemented. The design was not just right. So you need to figure out why it is, right? It's one thing is you see what happens. Another thing is you making decisions on what you actually find out as an analyst, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Okay. Now I think we're done with the general product analysis. The next thing you could have said it, your product team or somebody could have come and told you, hey Krish, you know what? There are a couple of clients who we are particularly interested in and their usages. So can you focus the next 2 weeks on those 2 clients or those 5 clients or those 15 clients, the team of digital analysts, for instance. Then you might do a client-specific product usage analysis. Now, one of your clients could be Snowpal. The other one is like, say, ABC Incorporated. Now, with Snowpal, you're going to say, okay, let me break it down by feature. Let me break it down, by feature, I mean like all of these that we are doing here, right? We saw a bunch of clicks and bunch of features, but there's a whole lot more to our product, for instance, right? So you can say break it down by feature, or you could say break it down by events, meaning user actions. What did they click on? What are the things they have clicked on the most? I don't care. I'm not looking at it at the feature level, looking at it more at the event level. Now, this tool that we saw there, it actually also, provided, gave us a list of events, right? We can filter by event types. You can say what events you need. We saw some of this in the last podcast, but it can tell you that it gives you a lot of categorization. You can learn more about it. Look at the tool, see what it actually means, and then focus on certain events. That's one way to do it. Or the third is you're breaking it down by time spent. I'm just going to look at where user has spent all of the most of their time, and let me start analyzing in that way. Now, I don't know if this particular tool gives you all of these options. I know it does features and events. Time spent, I haven't spent time looking at it. But maybe this tool does, maybe something else does. Maybe even if it doesn't do it directly, maybe you can find out a way for you to get to the bottom of those types of things. So you can go with breakdown by time spent. That's how you want to categorize analyzing Snowpal's users. For whatever reason, right? That doesn't mean you do it the same way for ABC. Now you could have the same criteria and the metrics, and you can apply that to all of your clients. That's one way of doing it. Or imagine 2 teams working on 2 different sets of clients, or you trying to compare and contrast 2 different clients for whatever reason, right? To either improve your product or to give better feedback to your clients and how their users are using their systems compared to other users using other systems that happen to be in the same industry and domain as that particular client. For that, you might slice it and dice it slightly differently. So in this example, I have ABC broken down by page. Here you're saying, you know what? I'm actually going to go by page. I'm going to focus on the key page, for instance, or I'm going to focus on the pods, for instance, or I might go completely differently and go to, I don't know, a different type of key. I might focus on a Kanban page, for instance, or I might go to charts, whatever it is that you actually want to focus on, right? It could be any of these things that you want to focus on. You focus on, break it down by pages. Or you break it down by frustrations or rage clicks. We've talked about frustrations and rage clicks a little bit, where the user seems to be clicking the same thing like 3 times. Maybe the action did not work for some reason. So you want to figure out all their frustrations, maybe rate them, give them weightages, and look at the top 5 or 10 items that frustrate those users for that client ABC Incorporated or the rage clicks. And then you try to focus on it. Or you could say I break it down by slowness of the page rendering. Maybe the page takes a whole second to render, not like 50 or 100 milliseconds. Maybe that action within the page, the granular Ajax action actually took that much time. The request, you click submit and it was spinning for like a half a second before it completed. Now the tolerance level in terms of time and how long your pages can take, it certainly depends on your industry, your clients, and what they expected, what they're used to, what the expectations are. But we're in 2024 at the time of this recording. If things take more than like a 50 or 100 milliseconds, then there is a serious problem, right? So don't wait for your clients to report issues of slowness. You should, jump the gun and figure out where there could be the potential for slowness. And there's 2 facets to it too. One is what is already slow. One is based on what you're seeing, what can actually become slower and slower and slower. You're sort of anticipating the slowness happening based on certain behavior and behavioral patterns that you're able to spot. I think all of this goes into you becoming, I would have to believe, a better digital analyst and a more experienced analyst as you go, right? So that's how I've broken down 2 sets of examples here, right? For Snowpal and for ABC Incorporated. So that's as far as client-specific product usage analysis is. How far am I into this podcast? We are coming up about a half hour. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up in the next 5 minutes. The third is feature-specific product usage analysis. This approach means you're actually going to completely not go at the general product level or at the product usage level of the client. You're actually going to go feature by feature, because maybe you have multiple teams working on different features, or you have a team of digital analysts working on all of the features. So you divvy that up between your team members. Krish is looking at dashboard, Varun's looking at key page, someone else is looking at blocks, and so on and so forth, right? So you can break it down by features and then take a particular feature. Let's say you take a conversations feature. You're going to say, okay, I don't know if I have other users. Yep, I do. Okay, I'm going to take this conversation feature, for instance, and then I'm going to analyze that, right? That's just as an example. Or I'm going to take a dashboard. I'm going to take this particular widget. Maybe I take a different widget, or take, maybe I take a chart at the dashboard level, which gives me a complete overview of everything that's happening across my, my application. Or maybe I go to the scheduler, right? I can take it feature by feature and actually do the product usage analysis. I just listed a bunch of them here, but just, we have like 50 different features, right? So you can have that list, and maybe you will prioritize and go with the top 5 or 10 that or by virtue of the results from previous analyses, those are the ones that are generally being used. Let me find out what's being used and get a better sense of that. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Ad hoc. Ad hoc is you're doing it by user role. Now let's say you have a bunch of clients in the space of, I don't know, your restaurant clients, by industry, for instance, or maybe it doesn't have to, maybe it's agnostic to industry. You're looking at all users who have a certain role called, I don't know, like a developer, not in your team, but on the client side that is using your product. You want to take a particular role, and you want to slice it and dice it by that role to see how all the developers are using your application. If you're like a B2B software related platform, you want to know how like say our APIs are B2B APIs, right? Now, if you wanted to use a tool to analyze that, you want to understand if we wanted a tool to analyze it, we want to understand, it's a slightly different example from what we were talking about earlier, but we would like to know which APIs are more popular than others, which endpoints within those APIs are more popular, and we can take developers, architects, product owners, and see who's using which ones more. That's by role. Now, by time windows, which, let's say, what do I have here? By month of the year, day of the week, time of the day, right? During the holidays, what is being used more? Which feature is being used more, for instance, right? During off-peak, during peak hours, during weekdays, during weekends. Maybe you have a product that's used more during weekends than weekdays, or more used during the middle part of the day than the early part of the day. So you want to break it down by the time windows and see what the behavior looks like. The third is by browser. Now, again, it could be, you might be catering exclusively to people using Chrome. Maybe you're focusing on that because that's the most popular browser that's out there today. Or maybe you have folks using your product on a responsive on the phone, but you don't have a native app, much like, unfortunately, like we have native apps on the app and Play stores at Snowpal, but say you don't have them yet. All that you have is responsive apps, which we have responsive app as well, but you can use this on Safari, but also on native mobile. But let's say you don't have it yet. And if people are going to be able to use your React application in a responsive manner on their phones, then if your iPhone users, and Safari probably plays an important role as well. So you maybe break it down by browser, and maybe you want to identify the bugs by a given, certain bugs show up in Safari versus Chrome. And there are always nuances, especially when it comes to UI and some of those items. Maybe you want to identify performance. Now, with single page apps, performance means a slightly different thing, because a lot of that is actually happening on your client's browser. But regardless, right, sometimes, how you manage state and how you, do invalidations and all of those things, caching and invalidations can play a huge role in the performance of your applications. Like we do a variety of different kinds of caching at on different tiers. So you want to identify that maybe by the browser. Or let's close this. The next is usage pattern. What's being more commonly used? What's unique? Maybe a more ad hoc way of doing this, right? Not by role, by time windows or client browser, but by user behavior. You're trying to draw a subjective design pattern saying, hey, I see people using it like this. They go from here to there, they navigate this way, they're creating keys. Before they go create key pods, they create like block pods. And I'm just talking specific language specific to our product. But if you take your product or your client's applications, that there might be certain other things that you're trying to analyze more subjectively. So that last item is very subjective. So it's a little hard for me to explain it without taking a very specific example. So all that I'm trying to say there is you're identifying user patterns. What are commonalities that you're identifying between users, between seemingly disparate users across systems, across industries? What are some of the things they are doing in a unique manner? What are some things they're doing that are not particularly unique, and there is a sense of commonality, right? You try to find all that out. Now, when you find the answers, after you find the answers to all these questions, right? You are actually, let me expand this, right? Okay. Oops. Yep. So, as you probably told, I've written, this is just a README file, and if you use Mark Map, it actually it converts it to a mind map, which is pretty cool. I know at Snowpal we use diagrams quite heavily, not just in our product as charts that we support, not just as features. I mean, even to communicate, socialize what we're doing within the team, we use a variety of different kinds of diagrams. A lot of times they are generated one way or the other, right? We're not drawing them out necessarily, at least most of the time, because it's a lot less efficient for us than to be able to write pseudocode and DSL and generate it. I'm going to do a podcast on that actually quite soon. I'll defer more of that to that podcast. But anyway, so this is what we looked at, right? So now, as an analyst, you found all of this out. Maybe at this point, I can actually stop sharing my screen. So you found all of that out. Now you're going to translate this into meaningful requirements that your best product team can consume, right? I have to believe it goes from the digital analyst team to the product team to the engineering team. So you tell the product team, hey, this is what I found out. And maybe your product team is actually playing the role of a digital analyst team as well, depending on the size of your organization, right? So if you're split as teams, like if you do different teams and you communicate that to your product team, however you decide to communicate that, which is probably for a different podcast altogether. And then they take all of the information and then they prioritize, come up with what needs done in this quarter, the next quarter, which team can work on what, and all of those decisions can now be quantifiably made because now it's not subjective anymore. You found out everything to the extent possible, more quantitatively by using a tool, by making inferences, by going with some of your hunch as well based on your prior experience. And then you put together this artifact and a set of documents, however, whatever I call them documents loosely, maybe diagrams, write-ups, maybe code that you give to your product team. And then the product team takes that and then propagates that and makes some decisions around what needs to be implemented in the next quarters to come, which is how you're going to be a more productive and efficient team. So hopefully that made sense to you, right? Hopefully the whole collective conversation here makes sense to you. Again, this is podcast number 2 in the digital analyst series. I'm going to call it 2 of 2. We're probably going to do more, but it might have a slightly different, we're going to add a slightly different hat when we actually have talk about it. So let's say this is 2 of 2, and hopefully you had some learnings. And if you're a digital analyst who wants to have more conversations, who wants to have a conversation or more conversations around these topics and would like to get on our podcast, we would love to host you. Certainly hit us up. Talk to you soon. Thank you.